I remember the night clearly, though I wish I didn't. The forest was thick with fog, the kind that curls around your ankles and clings to your skin. Every step I took on the damp earth echoed softly, swallowed almost instantly by the heavy silence. A pale light flickered in the distance, just beyond the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying with it a faint hum, like a melody someone had forgotten but couldn't stop hearing. I could feel my heart slow, almost blending with the rhythm of the quiet, until a door creaked somewhere behind me. I turned expecting nothing and found nothing. Yet something lingered, a presence I couldn't name, but I felt its eyes tracing me through the darkness. My breath hung in the cold air, visible and trembling. The fog thickened, and the world shrank to the small circle of light around my feet. I thought I was alone. But then, just beyond the trees, I saw a shadow detach from the night itself, moving with purpose. That's when I saw it. The moon hung low, pale and thin, over the cracked streets. Fog curled around the corners of abandoned buildings. I walked slowly, boots damp from the morning mist. The church appeared at the end of the lane, crouched and silent. Its walls peeled like old paper, and the windows were shattered, jagged teeth. The air smelled of stone, dust, and something deeper. Damp earth buried under time. A hum brushed the edges of my chest, soft. Not the wind, not the street. It came from the walls themselves, vibrating through my bones. I stepped closer. Shadows moved under the pale light, twisting and stretching. They remembered. They remembered everything. The door leaned slightly, heavy, as though it hadn't been touched in decades. I pressed my hand to it. It opened without a sound, slow, yielding, as if expecting me. Inside, the emptiness swallowed me. Dust rose in pale motes, dancing in the moonlight that filtered through broken glass. The floorboards groaned under the weight of nothing. I could feel the building watching. It held its breath. A chill climbed my spine, silent and insistent. The walls whispered, softly at first, like wind through old stone. Then, closer to my ear. I leaned in, hand tracing the cracked plaster. It pulsed, alive beneath my fingertips. I imagined voices folded into the bricks, murmuring secrets I was never meant to hear. Footsteps echoed behind me, though no one followed. A shadow shifted, longer than it should have been. I told myself it was the moon, the jagged glass, the fog. The pews sat in broken rows, splintered and hollow. The hymn books lay scattered, pages yellowed, edges curled. I lifted one. The paper trembled under my fingers, brittle, like it remembered someone long gone. A cold draft slid through the aisle, bringing with it the smell of damp stone. I closed my eyes for a moment. The hum inside the walls grew, not loud, but insistently there, pressing against my chest. I moved deeper. Shadows stretched toward me, then recoiled. The floor seemed softer here, more yielding, as if it wanted me to sink. The altar stood at the far end, pale in moonlight. Dust clung to its edges, a film over carved angels. Their eyes, chipped and dark, seemed to follow me. I pressed a finger to the altar. It felt warm, strangely so, as though the building's memory had settled there, holding something. Alive. The hum beneath my ribs answered. A pew creaked somewhere behind me. I froze. Nothing moved, and yet everything shifted. I traced the walls with my fingertips. The plaster was damp, and I could hear, softly, the walls sigh. A slow exhale, like a breath held for decades, finally escaping. I whispered a name I didn't remember knowing. The building answered with silence. Then the hum returned, pulsing, almost tender. I stepped back. The moonlight caught a broken window. Shards glittered like frozen tears. Shadows pooled beneath them, twisting quietly, alive. I touched the doorframe again. It didn't resist. It welcomed me out. The air outside smelled of wet stone and frost. I breathed slowly, chest tight, carrying the hum inside me. The church receded into fog, but I felt it, soft, waiting, whispering still beneath the walls, and I knew it would not forget. The church swallowed the night around me. The broken windows caught the moon, slicing pale light across the floor. The air smelled of dust and stone and something older, something waiting. I moved slowly. My boots pressed into the cold floor. silent as fog settling over the pews. Every breath stirred a faint rustle, and I felt the walls shift with it. A candle burned in the far corner. Alone. No wick, no holder, no match. Yet the flame danced, rhythm pulsing, stretching tall shadows across the walls. They reached toward me. Long fingers of light and dark, bending, twisting, I followed. Step by step, careful, as if each movement might disturb some delicate balance. The flame flickered and the shadows quivered, the pews bent under the glow, their broken edges soft in the light. Dust lifted in tiny spirals, glittering. It smelled of wet stone, smoke, something almost sweet, almost alive. The candle's rhythm seemed to echo in my chest. Not a beat I could name, but a pulse I felt. I leaned closer. Shadows stretched. I could hear my own breath, louder than it should have been. Soft, shallow, reverberating across the empty hall. Somewhere the wind stirred through broken glass. A pew creaked behind me. I stopped. Nothing moved, and yet the air felt heavier. The flame flickered again. A heartbeat of shadow. Long shapes bent toward each other, then away, twisting into forms I didn't recognize. I raised my hand. The light trembled under my fingers, though I never touched it. I imagined a breath brushing against the flame, a sigh caught in the air. The shadows grew, curling along the walls. I felt them watching, not with eyes, but with a memory older than the building itself. Rustling whispers seemed folded into the corners. I stepped closer to the candle. Its warmth was strange, not comforting. The smell of smoke brushed against my skin, almost like a warning. Soft footsteps echoed behind me, though I was alone. I turned. Nothing. Only the flame and the long, moving shadows. The candle shivered. Its flame bent, stretched, collapsed, and then gone. Darkness swallowed the room. I froze. Nothing to see. Nothing but the outline of shapes that weren't really shapes. The air felt thick, sticky, like I was breathing through water. The echoes of my own breath filled the space. Each inhale pulled the shadows closer. Each exhale pushed them away. I imagined whispers threading through the darkness. I wanted to move, but the floor beneath me felt uncertain, like it might tilt or open. The walls leaned in, silent, patient. I reached out, hand trembling, feeling for something, anything, cold, rough plaster under my fingers. The memory of the flame lingered on my skin, warmth fading into the damp chill. A faint hum rose from the walls. Soft, steady, almost comforting if I didn't listen too closely. I felt it in my chest, in the tips of my fingers, in the space between shadows. I whispered a name I didn't know I knew. The darkness responded with silence. A gentle static that settled over the room, quiet but present. Slowly I backed toward the door. The shadows watched me leave. Not angry, not welcoming, just remembering. Outside, the fog had thickened. The night smelled of wet stone, frost, and something older, waiting beyond the streets. I drew in a deep breath, letting it chase the darkness from my lungs. The church remained behind me, still, quiet. And the memory of that flickering candle followed, soft, pulsing, whispering. The stairs groaned beneath me. Wood thin and worn, sagging with age. Each step whispered secrets I couldn't name. The air smelled of dust, decay, and something colder, buried in the rafters. Fog from broken windows drifted up, curling around my ankles. The candlelight below faded, leaving pale shadows behind me. A hum rose, low and uneven, carrying the scent of damp stone. It was alive in the air, brushing against my skin, settling in my chest. Soft footsteps, or the memory of them, traced each step I took. I reached the choir loft. The railing was splintered, rough under my fingers. Cold settled there, a chill that felt like it had been waiting for me. Then the singing began. Faint at first, a hollow vibration that shivered through the rafters. Notes stretched too long, bending, twisting, dissolving in the cold air. It was not human. No breath I had ever known, no rhythm, no warmth. Just long echoes folding into themselves, curling over the floor, the walls, the air around me. I leaned over the railing. The loft stretched out below, empty pews pale in the moonlight. Nothing moved. Nothing. The notes sank deeper, filling every corner of the church. I felt them press against my ribs, reaching, tugging at something in my chest. A pulse I hadn't known I had, slowing, stretching, uncertain. The wood beneath my feet shifted, uneasy. I imagined shadows sliding along the beams, slipping between boards, folding into themselves. I pressed my hand to the railing. Cold, splintered, insistent. The singing changed. It became a murmur, then a whisper, then something thinner. It moved around me, under me, over me, filling the space I thought was empty. I looked down again. The pews stared back, still, pale, silent. The air smelled of wet stone, rust, and something faintly sweet. I stepped back. The floor groaned, echoing like a breath held too long. The notes pulsed with it, stretching, bending, folding into silence for a moment, then returned, long, hollow, everywhere at once. The railing vibrated softly beneath my fingers, matching the pulse of the music. I wanted to call out, but my voice was swallowed by the echoes. Even my own heartbeat seemed too loud here, too human. I moved along the loft, slow, careful. Shadows clung to the beams, pale light sliding across them like water. The hum rose again, under, through, between the notes. I leaned over once more. Still nothing. Just empty pews, dust, and the cold that seemed to breathe with the singing. A soft creak behind me. I froze. The floor beneath shifted, just enough, and the hum tightened in my chest. The notes began to fade. Thinner, quieter, curling back into the walls. The loft returned to silence, but not fully. The memory of sound hung in the air, heavy and waiting. I stepped back from the railing. The shadows clung to the edges of the loft, quiet now, patient. The cold settled again, like it had never left. I breathed slowly. Wood groaning under my weight, dust floating in thin pale light. The church waited. And I felt, watched, though I saw nothing at all. The moonlight slanted through the broken windows, spilling pale beams across the floor. Dust floated in the air, catching the light in tiny frozen motes. The air smelled of damp stone and old wood, faintly sweet, like decaying flowers. I stopped beneath a row of stained glass windows. Saints stared down at me. Their eyes, they followed me. At first, I thought it was the shadows shifting. Blinking made no difference. The faces held me, steady, unblinking, patient. The colors flickered as I moved, reds and blues bleeding into each other. The saints' mouths seemed to shift. A subtle pleading, almost desperate, caught in the curves of painted lips. I leaned closer. The glass was cold, uneven beneath my fingertips. I traced the outlines of a face. Smooth, hard, but somehow alive. A soft hum rose from the walls. Not from the glass, but it pressed against my chest, vibrating faintly through my bones. I felt the shadows behind me stir. I stepped back and the eyes followed. Every tilt of my head, every blink, they remembered. The pleading didn't fade. It lingered, curling in the edges of the colored glass. I breathed slowly, trying to shake it off. The smell of stone and dust thickened, filling my lungs. I imagined whispers tangled in the folds of the painted robes. A shaft of wind slipped through the broken panes. The glass quivered, catching the moonlight. The saints seemed to twist just slightly, tilting their heads as if leaning toward me. I blinked again, telling myself it was the candlelight, the shadows, the fog. But the pleading didn't leave. It lingered in the angles of their eyes, the small, careful curves of their mouths. I pressed my hand to the cool stone beneath the windows. The vibration from the walls grew, low and insistent. The silence between the hum and the shadows felt thick, heavy, expectant. I wanted to step away, but my feet stayed rooted. Each saint watched, patient, almost waiting. The air smelled of wet wood, old paper, and something faintly metallic, like blood long dried. A faint rustle rose behind me. I turned. Nothing moved. Yet the shadows pressed closer to the walls, folding into themselves. The saints' eyes followed me still. Subtle shifts in light made their faces twist ever so slightly. I imagined a breath brushing across the glass. I exhaled, slow, steady. The pleading softened but did not vanish. The colors shimmered, catching the corners of the room, bending, reaching. I stepped back. Cold air brushed my face. The hum receded, leaving only the soft echo of my own breathing. I touched the railing along the aisle, wood rough under my fingers. The shadows clung to the edges of the windows, still and patient. The moonlight faded behind a drifting cloud. The saints' faces darkened, eyes catching the last faint glimmer. I felt them watching me leave. I walked slowly toward the door. The air smelled of dust, cold stone, and something older, waiting. The pleading did not follow. But I knew it was still there, in the corners, in the glass, in the hush between shadows. The aisle was quiet. Dust hung in the air, drifting in pale beams from broken windows. The air smelled of cold stone and old wood, sharp, almost metallic. I found the confessional at the back, tucked in shadow. The wood was worn, splintered at the edges. Scratches carved names, dates, desperate messages across its surface. I knelt, fingers brushing over the carvings, rough under my fingertips. Some letters were deep, jagged, as if carved in panic. The air grew colder. It pressed against my skin, soft and insistent. A breath I didn't take filled the space between my shoulders. A whisper came from the slot, soft, almost gentle, then sharper. My name. I froze. The air thickened. Dust swirled around me, dancing in pale light. I leaned closer. The whispers repeated, curling around my ears. They were patient, insistent, carrying the weight of every secret ever spoken here. The scratches on the wood seemed to pulse, each carved letter deeper than before, though nothing moved. I traced a name, a date, feeling the pressure of memory pressed into the grain. Cold seeped into my hands. It lingered in my chest. Every inhale felt heavier, slower, as if the air itself remembered me. The whispers circled, almost brushing my skin. I imagined shapes behind the confessional, shadows folding into themselves. The wood seemed to breathe beneath my fingertips, alive with what it had held. A pew creaked behind me. I didn't move. The air smelled of damp stone, dust, and something faintly sweet. Like decay, the confessional's slot darkened. I imagined eyes watching, though I couldn't see them. The whispers grew quieter, stretching, elongating, filling the empty corners of the church. I touched the scratches again, letters jagged and sharp pressing into my fingers. The cold pressed deeper, like it wanted more than my hands. It wanted my chest, my breath. I whispered my name back. The slot answered. Not loud, but close, intimate, curling around the hollow of my ears. The air shifted. Shadows leaned closer to the walls, folding over the carvings. The church hummed faintly, the vibration through stone and wood brushing my ribs. I tried to stand. My knees protested, cold and stiff. The whisper followed, softer now, lingering just under the skin. I let my hand rest on the confessional. The rough wood, the scratches, the cold pressing in. A weight of memory, of every confession ever spoken here. The hum faded. The whispers receded, curling into the corners, waiting. The air still smelled of dust, cold stone, and old wood. I breathed slowly, chest tight. The confessional remained silent. But I knew it had remembered me. I stepped back. The shadows clung to the edges, patient. The church was quiet again, but the memory of my name lingered. The church stretched before me, empty and still. Moonlight spilled through broken windows, painting pale lines across the floor. Dust floated in thin streams, catching faint glimmers of light. I walked between the pews. The wood was rough beneath my fingertips, cold and worn. A faint rustling drifted just beyond my reach, like someone shifting in the shadows. The air smelled of damp stone and old wood, heavy with the memory of footsteps long gone. Each inhale pressed the chill deeper into my lungs. The pews groaned softly beneath invisible weight, settling, restless. I paused. Silence stretched, thick and watchful. The hum of the building under my skin reminded me I was not alone. Though nothing moved, the shadows clung to the corners, folding over the edges of the pews. The wood beneath my knees seemed to sigh with each step. I imagined figures there, flattened against the benches, patient, unseen. A gust of wind stirred through the broken glass. Dust swirled and settled like tiny motes of frost. I felt the air press against my back, almost like a hand, cold and waiting. I leaned over a pew. The space beneath was hollow. Yet the wood shivered, creaking, as if someone had just lifted weight from it. My footsteps were soundless on the stone floor. The rustling followed me, soft and patient, echoing in the hollow aisles. I imagined whispers curling under the benches, brushing my ankles. The air smelled of wet stone and something faintly sweet, like old paper left to rot. Every pew seemed to hold its own weight, invisible but tangible. The shadows shifted slightly, though I saw nothing move. I ran a hand along the top of a bench. Cold, rough, splintered. The vibration under my fingertips felt alive, pulsing faintly with a memory of someone or something sitting there. The rustling grew, almost imperceptible, brushing the edges of my ears. I stopped, letting the silence press in. It held me in place, patient, expectant. A hollow creak rose somewhere far back in the church. The pews beneath me trembled, settling again, and the shadows leaned toward the walls. I felt the weight of the emptiness pressing in, watching. I exhaled slowly, trying to let the cold go. The wood under my palms remained rough, the air thick, the smell of stone and dust unrelenting. The rustling faded, folding into the corners, waiting. I took another step. Soft, careful. The pews groaned, a subtle echo that followed me through the aisles. The church breathed around me, silent, heavy, patient. And though I walked alone, I could feel the memory of others pressing in, settling in the hollow spaces beneath the benches. I stopped at the center aisle. The shadows clung to the edges, silent and still. The rustling was gone. Only the church remained, and I was left with the weight of it. The altar loomed before me, pale light brushing its edges. Dust swirled in the air, drifting in thin beams through broken windows. The air smelled of cold stone, damp wood, and something faintly metallic. I noticed the floor beneath the altar. A subtle outline in the stone, almost hidden. A trapdoor, worn and quiet. I pressed my hand to it. The wood was cold, rough, and a faint vibration hummed through it. The hum pulsed softly, steady, almost inviting. I knelt and lifted the door. Darkness spilled upward, thick and still. The air smelled heavier here, dense with something ancient. A narrow staircase led down. The stone walls were cold under my fingers. Each step echoed softly, a muted rhythm in the quiet. The hum beneath me grew stronger. It pressed into my chest, vibrating through my ribs. Dust fell from the walls, dry, fragile, almost like ash. The cellar stretched below the altar. Shadows pooled in corners, deep and patient. The walls were lined with symbols, carved into stone long ago. They twisted in the dim light, shapes I could not name. Lines and curves, spiraling and angular, ancient and deliberate. I traced one with a fingertip. Cold, hard, insistent. The floor beneath me hummed steadily, quiet but alive. It pressed against my soles, into my knees, filling the space with tension I could feel. The air was thick, holding every small sound, every breath, every heartbeat. I stepped forward slowly. Soft footsteps against stone, careful, tentative. Shadows clung to the walls, stretching toward me and folding back again. The smell of damp earth grew stronger. A faint sweetness lingered beneath it, almost like incense long burned. I imagined the space had held secrets for centuries, waiting. I knelt to examine the symbols again. The carvings were sharp, precise, and hummed faintly beneath my touch. A rhythm, subtle, almost like the cellar itself was breathing. I stood and walked further. The cellar seemed to stretch longer than it should. Shadows pooled in every corner, shifting just slightly, folding over themselves. I ran my hand along the wall. Rough stone, cold, carrying the vibration through my fingertips. The hum beneath my feet pulsed in reply. A faint rustle rose behind me. I turned. Nothing moved. Only the shadows, patient and waiting. The air felt thicker now, almost solid, pressing against my chest. Every breath I took tasted of stone, dust, and something older, waiting. I imagined voices hidden within the walls, patient and silent, murmuring just beneath hearing. I knelt again, tracing a symbol with a finger. The hum grew quieter, softer, resonant. It pressed into my chest, my arms, lingering on my skin. The darkness settled around me. The cellar held me, patient, alive in ways I could not name. I stepped back from the walls, feeling the weight of the place. I stood at the foot of the stairs. The hum pulsed gently, fading into stillness as I prepared to leave. The shadows clung to the corners, patient, silent, waiting. I lifted the trap door. Moonlight spilled in from above. The cellar remained below, dark, humming, remembering. I drew a slow breath. The air smelled of stone, wood, and something older than the building itself, and I knew it would remain there, beneath the altar, long after I had left. The ceiling arched above me, shadowed and still. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, falling in thin, pale stripes. Dust drifted lazily, catching faint glimmers, carrying the faint smell of cold stone and old wood. A single lamp hung from the rafters. It swayed gently, though no wind moved the air. Its light carved the shadows, stretching them across the walls. I stepped closer. The smell of dust and rusted metal pressed into my nose. The hum of the building under my skin felt heavier here. Scratches marred the walls beneath the lamp. Handprints, claw marks, streaked in patterns of panic. I reached out a finger, brushing the rough wood. Cold. Jagged. The lamp swung toward me. I stepped back. It kept moving, patient, deliberate, slicing shadows across the floor. The scratches seemed to shift in the light. Lines twisting, stretching, almost alive. I imagined fingers pressed into the wood, hands clawing, reaching, desperate. The air grew colder. Each breath drew dust into my lungs, thick and dry. Soft rustling curled in the corners, brushing against my ankles, brushing against the walls. I took another step back. The lamp followed, swinging closer. The shadows it cast bent toward me, long, patient, hungry. I touched the wall. The handprints were rough under my fingertips, deep and jagged. The claw marks seemed sharper, as if pressing closer beneath the light. The hum under my feet grew, subtle, low, resonating in my chest. I imagined it pulsing through the scratches, carrying the memory of panic that had marked the walls. I blinked. The lamp swung steadily toward me. I held my breath. Shadows twisted in response, folding into each other. I tried to step aside. The air pressed back, thick and heavy. The smell of dust and old wood sharpened, metallic, almost like iron. I exhaled slowly, letting my hand rest on the wall. Cold, rough, alive with memory. The lamp slowed for a heartbeat, then resumed its motion, patient, relentless. I turned slightly, following the swing with my eyes. The scratches caught the light, glittering faintly, revealing deeper marks I had not noticed. Every line, every streak seemed to pulse faintly, echoing the hum beneath the floor. I felt the weight of the space pressing in. The ceiling low, the shadows close. The lamp swinging, patient, deliberate, relentless. I stepped back again. The hum receded slightly, folding into silence. The lamp paused in mid-swing, light trembling on the clawed walls. I drew a slow breath. The air smelled of dust, stone, old wood, and something sharp beneath it. The lamp hung still above me, swaying gently in its own rhythm, waiting. I moved toward the doorway. Shadows clung to the corners, patient, silent. The scratches on the walls seemed to watch me leave, faintly trembling in the pale light. The church was quiet again, but the memory of the swinging lamp lingered, patient, relentless, watching. The loft stretched above me, pale light spilling from the broken windows. Dust drifted in thin streams, catching faint glimmers on the floor below. The air smelled of cold stone, damp wood, and something faintly metallic lingering. I leaned over the railing. Shadows moved in the corners of the loft, slow, patient. At first, just wisps of fog curling along the beams. Then they descended, thickening, curling, stretching like smoke. The air pressed against my chest, humid and still, carrying a faint hum that vibrated beneath my feet. The shadows began to coalesce. Faint outlines of human forms appeared, tall, thin, vague. They hovered, weightless, stretching toward the aisle below. Their movements were deliberate. Slow gestures, hands rising and falling as if conducting music. Their mouths remained still, silent, yet I imagined the sound echoing inside my chest. The air smelled colder here, sharper, carrying dust and faint decay. I could feel the shadows brushing against the edges of the walls, pressing lightly against the pews. Every breath I took trembled with the quiet rhythm of their motions. They mimicked the choir I had once imagined in the loft. Hands rising, folding, gesturing to invisible music. The gestures were patient, rehearsed, but empty. I stepped back from the railing. The floorboards groaned softly under my weight. The shadows swayed slightly in response. Patient, aware, waiting. A thin haze curled along the edges of their forms. Faint hums rose from the air, threading through the beams and across the stone. It pressed into my chest. Subtle. Insistent. I leaned closer again. The figures followed, rising, bending, folding their hands in quiet mimicry. Their forms were fluid, edges shifting like smoke curling in moonlight. The shadows moved in unison. A silent rhythm, a choreography without sound. I imagined a voice beneath it all, hollow, distant, echoing inside the walls. The hum beneath my feet pulsed faintly. It matched the subtle sway of the shadows, weaving around the loft, through the beams, through the air. I traced a finger along the railing, cold, rough, grounding myself against the weight of it. I tried to breathe slowly. The forms did not falter. Their presence was patient, waiting, bending the air around them. A faint rustling rose from the pews below. I did not move. The shadows pressed gently toward the floor, filling the space between pews, corners, and walls. I could see hands, elongated, twisting slightly, hovering over invisible hymnals. The gestures repeated endlessly, rehearsed, patient, empty. The air smelled of dust, damp wood, and a faint trace of something older, like stone that had held memory for centuries. I stepped back from the railing. The figures sank slightly, lingering at the edges of the loft. The pale light brushed them faintly, their edges blurring, retreating into shadow. I drew a slow breath. The hum receded, leaving a quiet pressure in the air. The loft was still, yet I could feel the memory of the choir lingering. The shadows did not leave entirely. They waited in corners along the beams, patient and silent, and I knew they would remember the rhythm of this night just as I would. The room was still. Moonlight spilled through broken windows, thin and pale across the cold floor. Dust drifted in slow spirals, carrying the smell of stone and damp wood. I felt it first, a brush along my neck. I froze. I could feel it, icy, heavy, though no air moved. The hum of the building pressed faintly against my chest. Every breath I took trembled with it. The cold pressed deeper, brushing my skin, settling in my shoulders. A whisper followed. Soft, patient, curling around my ears. It promised I would not leave. I tried to turn. My neck would not obey. The air felt thick, holding me, pressing against the back of my head. I swallowed. The taste of dust and damp wood filled my mouth. My heartbeat thrummed in my chest, loud, uneven, echoing in the still air. The shadows along the walls deepened. They pressed closer, patient and slow. I imagined them brushing along the edges of the room, folding over themselves. I breathed slowly. The cold remained, brushing my skin, lingering over my shoulders. The whisper repeated, faint, patient, almost a pulse in my mind. I could feel it closer now. The air shifted subtly, heavy, moving over my nape. The chill pressed into my spine, steady, insistent. The hum beneath my feet grew faint, vibrating through the stone. I tried to focus on the floor, the rough edges of the cold stone beneath my fingers. But the breath lingered, patient, unyielding. I imagined eyes in the darkness, not moving, not alive, but aware, patient. The whisper followed the rhythm of my pulse, curling around each heartbeat. I wanted to speak. My lips felt heavy, immobile. The air pressed against them, thick, carrying the cold and the whisper. The shadows stretched longer, folding in the corners, along the walls. I could hear my own breath, slow and trembling, mixing with the faint hum in the floor. The chill brushed against my neck again, sharper, deliberate. I tried to step forward. My legs obeyed slowly, heavy, reluctant. The room seemed to stretch around me, the cold curling and folding into each shadow. The whisper grew faint, repeating my name softly, insistent. I imagined it moving beneath the floor, through the walls, wrapping around the corners of the room. The chill lingered, pressing against my neck, shoulders, spine. I drew a slow breath. The air smelled of damp wood, cold stone, and faint decay. I felt the weight of it. Breath and whisper, shadow and cold, pressing in, patient, inevitable. I could not move my head. I could not look behind me. All I could do was feel, listen, and let the cold press against me. The hum receded slightly. The whisper softened but did not vanish. The room held its weight around me. Patient, aware. I exhaled slowly. The breath on my neck faded to a memory. The shadows remained, folded in the corners, waiting. And I knew. Some part of the church had claimed me, if only for a moment. The stillness lingered, heavy, patient, and I was alone. The stairs creaked beneath me, spiraling upward through the shadowed tower. Dust hung in the air, drifting in thin shafts of moonlight through cracks in the walls. The smell of cold stone and rusted metal pressed faintly against my nose. I reached the top and paused. The bell hung massive and still, yet it moved. Slowly, deliberately, swinging as if caught in an invisible hand. Each sway pushed a note into the air, low, deep, rolling through the tower and into the forest beyond. The sound carried both warning and menace, pressing against the trees, threading through the fog. The air felt heavier here, thick with vibration. My fingertips brushed the rough stone of the tower wall. The hum of the bell settled under my skin, slow, insistent. I leaned closer to the railing. Shadows pooled beneath the bell, stretching across the floor. Dust drifted up in gentle spirals, catching the pale light in tiny, frozen motes. The bell swung again, each toll echoing farther than it should. I imagined the sound rolling through the forest, brushing the bare branches, rustling leaves that were long dead. The vibration pressed into my chest, steady, unrelenting. I stepped closer to the edge of the platform. The wind that was not there brushed faintly against my face, cold and humid, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and rusted metal. I traced a finger along the railing. Rough stone, sharp edges, cool and solid beneath my touch. The bell's slow motion seemed to watch me, deliberate, patient. The forest below was silent, yet the echoes of the bell lingered. Each toll stretched, fading slowly into nothing. I imagined the sound folding into the shadows, carrying weight, history, a quiet warning. The air pressed against my shoulders, heavy, insistent. I could feel the vibration of the bell through the soles of my boots. Every heartbeat matched the slow rhythm, a pulse tethered to the tower itself. I leaned closer, eyes on the swinging metal. It gleamed in the pale moonlight, cracks running along its surface. Each fissure caught the light like frozen veins, twisting, fragile, patient. A faint rustling rose from below, brushing against the edges of the platform. I did not move. The bell swung, slow, inevitable, its echoes curling through the forest, folding back to me. I drew a slow breath. The air smelled of cold stone, rusted metal, and something older, waiting. The vibration hummed faintly beneath my feet, blending with the memory of each toll. I could feel the weight of the forest beyond, silent, listening. The bell's shadow stretched across the platform, folding into corners, touching edges of darkness. I imagined hands pressed into the cracks of the wood, unseen, patient. I stepped back from the railing. The bell swung one last time, slow and deliberate, its toll folding into silence. The air lingered heavy, patient, pressing around me. The tower seemed to breathe. Shadows clung to the corners, stretching up the walls, watching. And I was left with the echo, the vibration, the cold reminder that some things do not rest. The cathedral stretched wide, empty, and silent. Moonlight filtered through fractured stained glass, painting the floor in muted colors. Dust drifted in thin ribbons, carrying the faint scent of old wood and cold stone. I approached the organ. The keys were worn, pale beneath the pale light. The air felt heavier here, thick, almost vibrating under my skin. I reached toward it. The keys pressed themselves, slowly, deliberately, hollow notes spilling into the cathedral. The sound rolled along the walls, deep, mournful, echoing through empty aisles. Each note trembled in the air, brushing my chest, folding into the shadows. I stepped closer. The smell of dust and aged wood grew stronger. A faint metallic tang lingered, subtle, almost like old blood. The keys continued their slow motion. Notes stretched, lingering longer than they should. The hum of the air pressed gently against my ears, weaving between the chords. Shadows shifted along the walls. They stretched toward the organ, reaching, folding into the corners. I imagined the sound carrying memory, each note a pulse of the cathedral itself. My fingertips hovered over the keys, cold, rough, fragile beneath my touch. Yet the notes pressed on, patient, mournful, unending. I breathed slowly. The air was heavy, humid, carrying the faint scent of candle wax long extinguished. The sound pressed into my chest, a quiet rhythm I could not escape. The floorboards groaned faintly beneath me. Dust fell from the beams above, drifting in the muted light. Every note of the organ seemed to fold the air tighter around me, patient, deliberate. I leaned closer. The shadows deepened, stretching in response to each hollow key. I imagined the weight of invisible hands pressing the notes, patient and unseen. The cathedral seemed alive with memory. Each note echoed, fading, folding back into silence only to rise again. The hum of stone and wood beneath my feet mirrored the rhythm of the keys. I could feel it in my chest. A pulse, steady, mournful, impossible to ignore. The organ played on, indifferent, patient, alive. I stepped back slightly. The sound filled the cathedral, pressing into every corner, every shadow. The air smelled of cold stone, aged wood, and faint incense. I drew a slow breath. The keys continued their motion, hollow and deliberate. The shadows clung to the walls, patient, waiting. I left the organ and moved toward the aisles. The notes followed, curling softly, echoing in my chest, in the floor, in the stone. The cathedral remembered every touch, every sound, every breath. The keys pressed themselves, slow and mournful. I felt the weight of it settle around me, patient, silent, unavoidable. And I knew the sound would linger, long after I had stepped into the quiet night. The ceiling hung low in the cold air. Pale light filtered through cracks in the walls, brushing the floor in thin, ghostly lines. Dust drifted slowly, carrying the faint smell of rusted metal and damp stone. Chains hung from above, long, blackened, swaying slightly. As if pulled by invisible hands, patient, deliberate, I stepped closer. The metal creaked faintly, pressing into the quiet air. The hum of the building threaded through my chest, steady and insistent. I reached out a hand. Cold, rough, rust flaking into my palm. The chains trembled in response, subtle, alive. I followed their path. Across the floor, faded marks showed where something had dragged. Footsteps pressed into the dust, deep, deliberate, patient. The air smelled sharper here. Iron and rust mixed with damp stone, thick in my lungs. Each breath trembled against the vibration of the chains. I traced the dragging marks with a fingertip. Rough, jagged, worn into the floor over time. I imagined the weight that had moved along this path, patient, relentless. The chains shifted again. They twisted slowly, brushing the air, curling shadows along the walls. I could feel them in my chest, subtle, pressing, patient. I stepped back, soft footsteps against the stone. The chains moved toward me, slow, deliberate. Their shadows stretched across the floor, folding into corners, pressing into the edges of the room. The air grew colder. A faint hum rose from the floorboards, vibrating in tandem with the swaying chains. I imagined hands reaching from the shadows, brushing along the rusted links. I followed the dragging marks further. They led to the edge of a darkened corner, folding into shadow. The chains moved silently above, tracing invisible paths in the air. The smell of iron grew stronger. Dust and rust mingled with the faint scent of decay. The air pressed against my skin, heavy, insistent, patient. I traced one link, rough, cold beneath my fingers. The chain shivered slightly. A whisper of movement echoed through the room, threading along the floor, up the walls. The dragging marks seemed endless. I imagined weight pressing into the dust, heavy and unseen. The chains responded, swaying slightly, patient, deliberate. I stepped back toward the doorway. The shadows of the chains curled along the floor, following the path I had traced. Every breath trembled with the memory of movement, of weight, of unseen hands. The air settled. Chains swayed gently, patient, silent. The dragging marks lingered, etched into the dust, waiting for someone else to trace them. I exhaled slowly. The rusted metal hummed faintly in the quiet, and I knew the room would remember. Long after I had stepped into the silence outside, the doorway stretched wide, pale light spilling across the floor. Dust drifted in thin streams, carrying the faint scent of damp stone and cold air. The cathedral felt heavier here, shadows folding into corners, patient and still. I saw it first in the edge of my vision, a figure tall and thin standing in the doorway, its face pale as fog, featureless in the faint light. It did not move, not a blink, not a shift. It simply watched. The air pressed gently against my skin, cool and humid. I could feel my own breath, slow and shallow, trembling in my chest. A faint hum threaded beneath the stillness, vibrating through the stone beneath my feet. I could not look away. Every instinct screamed to move, to flee, yet my body remained rooted. The figure stayed, patient, waiting, unmoving, shadows stretched along the floor. They curled toward the doorway, folding over themselves, brushing against the pale light. Dust swirled in lazy spirals, catching the edge of the figure in muted glimmers. I stepped slightly forward. The figure did not respond. The air smelled faintly of decay, cold stone, and something metallic, distant. A soft rustling rose from the corners of the cathedral. I imagined movement along the beams, shadows folding, stretching, patient. The figure's eyes, or the absence of them, held me, still and unrelenting. I traced a fingertip along the railing nearby, rough cold grounding beneath my hand, yet the weight of its presence pressed into my chest, subtle, unyielding. The cathedral seemed to breathe. A faint vibration hummed beneath my boots, echoing through stone and wood. The figure did not move. It simply waited. I tried to shift my gaze. Every shadow seemed to ripple toward it, patient, deliberate. The air grew colder, pressing against my neck, my shoulders, my spine. I inhaled slowly. The faint metallic scent strengthened, mingling with dust and stone. My heartbeat trembled in rhythm with the hum beneath my feet. The figure leaned subtly, or perhaps it was the light shifting. Its presence remained absolute, folding the shadows around it, tethering the air. I felt the stillness wrap around me, quiet, patient, unyielding. I exhaled slowly. The dust drifted down, settling over stone and shadow. The figure remained, watching, silent, patient. I could feel the weight of time here. Every breath, every shift of shadow, every faint vibration was marked in its presence. It did not move, did not speak, yet claimed the space around me entirely. I stepped back, slow and careful. The shadows stretched, curling along the floor, folding toward the figure. Its pale face stayed fixed in the doorway, patient, unmoving, endless. I drew another breath. The cathedral hummed faintly beneath me, cold, patient, quiet. And I knew it would remember me here, just as I would remember it. Rain tapped softly against the broken windows. Outside, the sky was dark, thick with clouds, endless and heavy. The air smelled of wet earth, moss, and distant lightning. Inside, the candles burned steadily. Flames swayed gently, indifferent to the storm outside. Their pale light stretched across the floor, brushing stone and shadow alike. Puddles collected on the uneven floor. They reflected the flickering candles, bending the light into shapes that moved unnaturally. Shapes that were not mine, twisting in corners of vision, patient, deliberate. I stepped slowly among the pews. The wood was cold beneath my fingers, slick with rain that seeped through the cracked roof. Each step echoed faintly, swallowed by the weight of the storm outside. The reflections moved differently than I did. They lingered longer, stretching, bending, folding into themselves. I could feel them watching, patient, waiting for recognition. The smell of damp stone grew stronger. Mixed with it, the faint scent of wax and something older, faint, metallic. The air pressed gently against my cheeks, cool, humid, insistent. I leaned closer to a puddle. The shapes twisted again, elongating, forming angles my body could not match. I saw shadows stretch across the walls, curling toward the light of the candles. The rain tapped faster, a soft static against the windows. The air vibrated faintly under the hum of falling water. Each drop seemed to echo inside me, brushing my spine. I stepped around a puddle. The reflection lingered, watching, folding into corners, patient. The candle's glow seemed to follow, illuminating what I could not fully see. The church smelled faintly of damp wood, wax, and lingering ash. Every breath I drew trembled against the chill that pressed from the floor upward. The reflections twisted again, subtle and deliberate, folding over themselves. I moved toward the altar. The rain outside muted, distant, almost hushed by the walls of stone. The candles burned steady, each flame bending toward nothing, toward shadows unseen. I could hear the faint rustle of wet leaves outside. Inside, the silence pressed around me, punctuated only by dripping water and soft breaths. The reflections shifted again, now longer, stretching along the puddles like fingers. I knelt at the edge of a puddle. The shapes were vague, humanoid but wrong, patient, deliberate. I reached a hand toward them. The water was cold, rough with sediment, unyielding. The candlelight flickered slightly. Shadows danced along the walls, slow, folding, patient. The air smelled faintly of rain, wax, and distant decay. I drew a slow breath. The reflections moved, trailing after me, bending light in ways that should not exist. The storm outside rumbled faintly, echoing in the silent cathedral. I stepped back, careful, soft. The puddles remained, reflecting twisted versions of myself. The candles burned steady, indifferent to the rain, to the shapes, to the shadows. The church seemed to sigh with the storm. I felt the weight of it, patient, pressing, folding the shadows, the reflections, the air around me, and I knew the light would remain, twisting shapes, long after I left the cold stone floor behind. The church smelled of old wood and candle wax, faint with the dampness of rain seeping through broken panes. The air was thick, quiet, humming softly beneath the weight of stone. Dust drifted lazily, settling over worn pews and cracked tiles. I approached the confessional. Its wood was dark, scarred with scratches, names etched and forgotten. I pressed a hand to the door. Cold, rough, patient, a whisper slid from the slot. Not my name, not my voice. Old sins carried from long ago, brushing the walls like smoke. I leaned closer. The sound pressed against my ears, low, tremulous. The words were fragmented, fading, then returning, echoing into the corners of the cathedral. The smell of old wood deepened. Hints of dust, decay, and faint incense lingered in the air. Every breath trembled with the weight of names I did not know. I knelt, careful, soft, at the edge of the confessional. The whispers moved with the air, curling around the stone and wood, patient, deliberate. I could feel the echo of each confession press against my chest, small and sharp. The shadows shifted along the walls. They stretched and folded, brushing against the candlelight, bending the space around them. Each name seemed to linger longer than it should, pressing into the floorboards beneath me. I touched the slot again, rough, splintered, carrying the faint hum of memory. The voices wove through the silence, carrying secrets I had not earned, pressing into the air I breathed. A faint rustle rose from the corner. Not the wind, not the rain, but movement folded in shadows. The whispers echoed softly, patient, deliberate, stretching into the walls. I traced a fingertip along the edge of the door. Cold splintered, alive with time. Each confession seemed to fold back on itself, lingering, patient, subtle. The cathedral seemed to breathe. Every inhale pressed the whispers closer, threading through my chest. The hum of stone and wood carried the names, carrying memory across empty space. I stepped back slightly. Shadows pressed into corners, curling with the echoes. The faint scent of old wax and damp wood rose with each breath. I knelt again. Whispers brushed against me, low, tremulous, patient. Old sins, unclaimed, pressed into the walls, into the floor, into the air around me. The confessional seemed alive. Every scratch, every etched letter held a memory, folding the whispers into space. I could feel it in my chest, patient, unmoving, infinite. The shadows stretched with the echoes. Every breath, every heartbeat, every small movement seemed magnified, folded into silence. The names lingered, patient, deliberate, pressing gently against the edges of my mind. I drew a slow breath. The whispers faded slightly, retreating into the dark corners, patient, waiting. The confessional remained, small, heavy, a vessel of voices long forgotten. I stepped back, careful, soft. The air settled around me, thick with dust, wood, and the faint hum of memory, and I knew the confessional would remember every whisper, long after I left the stone floor behind. The air was cool, damp, heavy with the scent of rain seeping through broken windows. The cathedral stretched above me, pale light spilling from fractured panes. Dust drifted lazily, settling over stone and wood, patient and slow. I approached the staircase. Wood worn thin, edges frayed, shadows pooling in each crevice. The steps disappeared into darkness, thick, silent, waiting. I set a foot on the first stair. It groaned beneath my weight, not a simple creak, but a low, warning sound resonating through bone and stone. The air smelled faintly of mold and cold wood. A chill ran up my spine, brushing the nape of my neck. The darkness below seemed to breathe, slow and patient. I descended slowly. Each step shivered beneath me, cracking lightly, carrying the weight of years. The echo stretched back, long, deliberate, vibrating against the walls. Shadows curled along the staircase. They pressed against the edges of light, patient, deliberate. I could feel the wood shift beneath my fingers as I brushed the railing. The smell of wet stone and old wood thickened. A faint metallic tang lingered in the damp air. Every inhale pressed the darkness closer, curling into corners, patient. The stairs cracked again, deeper this time. The sound rolled through the cathedral, low, alive, warning. I hesitated, hand gripping the splintered wood, breath trembling softly. A soft rustling rose from the darkness below. Not wind, not rain, but movement folded in shadows, patient, deliberate. I could feel it underfoot, beneath the boards, beneath my chest. I stepped down another stair. It groaned under me, louder, resonating in bone and muscle. The darkness waited below, quiet, patient, unyielding. The railing was rough beneath my fingers. Dust and splinters brushed my skin, cold, sharp. Each step echoed faintly, swallowed by the weight of the silent cathedral. I drew a slow breath. The stairs cracked again, soft but deliberate, like a voice warning me. The shadows stretched longer, curling along the edges, patient and watchful. The smell of damp stone, wood, and distant rain pressed against my senses. I felt the vibration of each step in my chest, soft, insistent, alive. The darkness beneath me seemed endless, patient, folding into itself. I stepped down slowly. The staircase shivered beneath my weight, groaning, cracking, alive with memory. The faint hum of stone and air pressed into my bones. The shadows stretched with every movement. Edges of light folded, curled, brushed against the blackness below. The air grew colder, heavy, patient, brushing my cheeks, my neck, my spine. I stopped mid-step. The cracks beneath my feet echoed like whispers, low, deliberate, waiting. The staircase seemed to sigh beneath me, patient, unyielding, alive. I drew a final, slow breath. The darkness below pressed against me, silent, patient, unrelenting, and I knew that every step forward would carry me deeper, into the cold, into the silence, into the weight of memory beneath the shattered wood. The nave stretched before me, dark and hollow, stone cold beneath my feet. A faint chill lingered in the air, thick with damp and dust. The candlelight from behind flickered weakly, brushing pale patterns across the walls. A fog rose slowly, thin at first, curling around my ankles like cold fingers. It smelled faintly of wet stone and something older, forgotten. I stepped forward. The mist moved with me, curling, folding, patient. Shadows shifted inside it, vague, almost familiar. I blinked. Figures emerged briefly, just beyond focus. Tall, thin, unmoving, but when I opened my eyes again, they were gone. The floor beneath me was slick with condensation. Each footstep pressed through the fog, soft, swallowed. The air hummed faintly, a vibration beneath my ribs, low and insistent. Another figure appeared. It blurred at the edges, a suggestion of form more than flesh. I could feel its presence, pressing gently against the fog, patient, deliberate. I drew a breath. Cold air brushed my cheeks, carrying the scent of stone and damp wood. The fog wrapped higher, coiling around my knees, around my shins, almost alive. I moved slowly, careful, each step soft. The shapes drifted just out of reach, vanishing when I blinked. Their silence pressed in, heavy, patient, a weight I could feel in my chest, a rustling whispered along the floor. Not wind, not footsteps, but movement curling in shadows. The figures seemed to watch, patient, deliberate, waiting for nothing. I reached out a hand. The fog clung to my fingers, cold and damp. The shapes flickered, twisting, folding, never quite there. The air grew thicker. The faint hum beneath the stone deepened, resonating softly in my bones. I felt the fog move higher, brushing against my thighs, cold and insistent. I stopped. The figures froze, still for a heartbeat, then drifted again, patient, unmoving. The smell of wet stone and faint incense lingered, pressing in with every breath. I stepped forward again. Each motion swallowed by fog, by shadow, by the quiet weight of the cathedral. The figures shifted, mimicking my movements, close yet impossibly distant. A soft sigh rose through the nave. Not wind, not human, but something folded in the fog. I could feel it brush my neck, my shoulders, patient, deliberate. The candlelight flickered. Shadows and fog danced together, coiling, folding, stretching. The figures dissolved once more, leaving only the cold, the mist, and the hush of stone. I breathed slowly. The fog wrapped one final time around my ankles, then lingered near the pews, silent and patient. The nave seemed infinite, hollow, and watching, waiting for the next movement I dared make. The air in the cathedral was thick, damp, carrying the scent of stone and old incense. Candlelight flickered weakly, throwing soft shadows across the nave. A faint hum lingered, almost beneath hearing, vibrating through my chest. I noticed a tattered curtain, edges frayed, heavy with dust. It hung like a veil, hiding something deeper, something untouched. The fabric whispered as I brushed it aside, threadbare and cold. Behind it, a secondary altar appeared. Ancient wood, polished dark with age, untouched by time. Symbols carved deep into its surface glowed faintly, soft light pulsing slowly. The glow seemed to match my heartbeat. Soft, insistent, like the room had noticed me. I pressed a hand against the altar. Cold, rough, alive with quiet energy. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and something metallic. A faint hum pressed against my ears, vibrating through bones, steady, insistent. Shadows clung to the edges of the altar, curling in pale candlelight. I knelt slowly, careful. The floor beneath me was cold, dust shifting beneath my fingers. The symbols pulsed softly, gentle, alive, matching the rhythm of my chest. A whisper rose, not words, just tone, like the air itself vibrating. It brushed my ears softly, patient, deliberate. I could feel the altar watching, patient, waiting. The candlelight flickered. Shadows stretched long across the walls, curling toward me, folding in silence. The hum deepened, pressing through the air, through the floor, through my ribs. I traced a finger over one glowing symbol. The wood was rough, worn by centuries, yet smooth in certain places. Cold radiated from it, like ice beneath skin, insistent and patient. The altar seemed alive in the silence. Each symbol pulsed in time with my heartbeat, slow, deliberate, steady. I could feel it in the soles of my feet, in the hollow of my chest, in the tips of my fingers. I drew a slow breath. The smell of stone, wood, and faint decay pressed in. The glow intensified just slightly, folding shadows across the floor. I leaned closer. The light from the symbols brushed my face, pale and insistent. I felt the weight of history, patient, pressing into the room, into the air, into me. The candle flames shivered. A faint static hummed through the air, barely audible but pressing against the skin. Shadows stretched, retreating, advancing, folding over themselves, patient. I could not look away. The symbols pulsed steadily, matching my own heartbeat exactly. The air seemed to hum with intent, patient, alive, deliberate. I drew one final breath. The room waited silently, the altar glowing softly, patient, unyielding. And I knew, as I knelt there, that the cathedral held more than stone and wood. It held memory, rhythm, a quiet life that pulsed beneath the quiet, beneath the fog, beneath the shadows. The cathedral was quiet, but not silent. A low hum filled the air, subtle, vibrating through the stone. It pressed against my chest, slow, insistent, patient. I could not see it. Could not trace it to a corner, a wall, a shadow. Yet it felt intimately aware of me. The air was thick with dust and cold. Every breath carried a whisper of stone and old wood. The hum seemed to curl around it, brushing against my lungs. I took a step forward. The floor was rough beneath my shoes, uneven, alive with shadows. The hum followed, rising softly, folding into my heartbeat. Candlelight flickered weakly in the distance. Soft light pooled over pews and stone, barely touching the edges. Shadows stretched, coiled around columns, trembling slightly. I pressed a hand to a wall, cold, rough, dusted with centuries of neglect. The hum pulsed beneath my fingertips, almost tactile, pressing through skin. A draft brushed my neck, though no door had opened. It carried the scent of damp earth and something metallic. The hum throbbed in response, like a heartbeat outside my own. I paused. Silence wrapped the cathedral, heavy, expectant. The hum lingered, patient, deliberate, aware. Footsteps might have been mine, or might have been something else, shifting just beyond perception. Each step folded the hum closer, vibrating in my ribs. I leaned closer to a column. The stone was cold, almost wet beneath my touch. The hum moved with me, curling through the shadows, slow, knowing. A distant window rattled. Fog pressed against it, pale light spilling in, soft and unsteady. The hum thickened, deepening, folding into the stillness. I could not locate its source, could not see its shape, its body, its presence. Yet it followed, intimate, deliberate, watching every pulse. I drew a shallow breath. The air was damp, carrying a whisper of decay, of centuries pressing together. The hum responded, vibrating in my chest, rising in quiet insistence. I took another step. Shadows shifted slightly, but no figure appeared. The hum traced my movement, patient, knowing, almost sentient. The candles flickered again. Their light stretched long fingers across the floor. The hum curled into each shadow, filling every empty corner. I stopped completely, held my breath. The hum did not stop. It pressed against me, wrapping around ribs and spine. Every vibration felt deliberate, personal, aware. I realized I was not alone. I did not see it, could not touch it. But I could feel it, patient and cold, echoing in the hollow spaces around me. And I knew, quietly, as the hum pressed against my chest, that the cathedral itself was aware, watching, listening, waiting. The loft smelled of dust and cold wood. I climbed slowly, each step muted against the worn floorboards. The fog from below had thinned, leaving the air still, heavy. Pale light spilled through shattered windows. I could see the pews clearly now, empty. Where shadows had lingered before, nothing remained. Just the grain of the wood, gray and rough beneath my fingers. A quiet emptiness pressed against my chest, but the echo remained. A soft, relentless choir. No bodies, no mouths moving, just sound stretching across the loft. I moved closer to the railing. The hum of stone and shadow from below faded, leaving only the echo of voices. They wrapped around me, insistent, patient. I pressed a hand to the pew nearest. Cold, rough, solid. No one had been here, but the air vibrated with memory. The echo followed me as I stepped forward. Soft breaths brushed my neck, though I was alone. Each note lingered longer than it should, pressing in, folding into the silence. I leaned over the railing, looking down at the nave. Empty benches, smooth stone. Yet the choir continued, a ripple in the still air. A candle flickered far below, pale and hesitant. Its reflection shimmered across the windows. The sound seemed to rise from the walls themselves, faint, hollow, eternal. I closed my eyes. The voices surrounded me. I felt them in my chest, under my skin, pressing against my ribs. No shape, no form. Just the memory of presence. Footsteps might have followed me. Or maybe the echo imagined them. Either way, the loft held me in its quiet, relentless grasp. I took a breath. The wood groaned beneath it, though no one moved. The echo stretched on, soft, patient, lingering. The air smelled faintly of mildew and old stone. A whisper of something metallic lingered behind it. It was a smell that belonged to the memory of the place, not to me. I stood very still. The choir's echo flowed around me. It did not pause. It did not rest. I could not look away, not because of fear exactly, but because the space itself wanted me to see nothing, to feel the emptiness and listen. I leaned back finally, taking one slow step away from the railing. The echo followed, filling every corner of the loft. Soft, relentless. Even in the absence of bodies, I was not alone. The space had remembered me, and it would not forget. The nave was filled with fog, curling along the floorboards like smoke. It swirled around my ankles, damp and cold, clinging to my skin. The air smelled of stone and wet earth, heavy and still. I stepped forward. Soft footsteps barely made a sound. The fog shifted, thickening around my knees, then my waist. Then I saw them. Pale hands, fingers long and thin, reaching through the mist. They moved slowly, deliberately, though nothing was there to grasp. They hovered near my arms. I felt a chill trail along my skin like frost spreading beneath the surface. They touched nothing, yet left a coldness that clung. I shivered, not from the cold of the fog, but from the awareness. Something unseen, intimate, brushing against me. I could feel it in the small hairs along my arms, in the ache of my chest. The hands disappeared briefly, dissolving into the mist. Then another appeared. And another, each trace colder than the last. I lifted my hand to the fog. It passed through, yet the chill lingered, as if frozen into the air itself. I could feel the outlines of fingers where none existed. A whisper drifted beneath the fog. Not words I could understand. A vibration against my eardrums, soft and insistent. It seemed aware of me, studying me, patient. The candlelight from the altar flickered. Shadows stretched long and thin across the walls. The hands followed, pale shapes stretching through the mist, leaving invisible paths. I tried to move backward. The fog shifted faster, curling around my legs, resisting, holding me. The chill climbed my spine, cold as marble. I closed my eyes, breathed in slowly, and the hands traced along my skin again, light as a sigh, heavy as a memory. I felt each fingertip along my arms, across my shoulders, cold, empty, yet insistent. They left no mark, but the sensation lingered, like shadows pressed against my nerves. A faint smell rose, copper and wet stone. I couldn't tell if it came from the fog or the hands themselves. The air trembled slightly, a low hum beneath my ribs. The fog shifted, and the hands receded. But the cold trails remained, etched into my skin. I touched my arm. It was cold, but no one had been there. I took another step forward, hesitant. The hands appeared again, paler now, thinner, reaching from angles I hadn't noticed. They hovered and drifted, brushing against nothing and everything at once. I pressed my hands to my chest, trying to calm the hum in the air. It vibrated in sync with my heartbeat, insistent, heavy. The fog pulsed, stretching and collapsing, and the hands moved within it like memory. They lingered a moment longer. A final brush along my cheek, chilling, intimate. Then they vanished, leaving only the fog and the echo of presence. The nave was quiet again. The candlelight flickered, shadows folding into themselves. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and frost. I was alone. And yet, not alone. The chill remained. The memory of hands, pale and patient, brushing against my skin, lingered long after they had gone. The church was silent. A faint draft brushed my face, carrying the scent of wet stone and old wood. The fog lingered low, curling along the floorboards, thin and hesitant. I noticed it then, a door, where none had been before. Its edges were blurred, faint as a memory. I reached out. The wood was cold, almost soft beneath my fingertips. A pulse ran through it, subtle, like a heartbeat buried deep. I pressed my hand against the surface. It moved slightly under my touch, almost liquid. The air hummed faintly, vibrating through my chest. I opened it slowly. The hinges whispered, bending in a soundless groan. Beyond, darkness poured like ink, thick and alive. It shifted as I looked, curling and stretching. The edges moved independently like liquid with no weight. I could feel it breathing, though there was no air to stir. A faint scent rose, metallic and damp, mingling with the stone around me. It clung to my nose, sharp and cold. The darkness pulsed softly, in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I took a step closer. The floor beneath my feet trembled lightly, like it remembered my steps before I took them. The fog from the nave swirled toward the door, drawn to the dark beyond. I hesitated. The darkness undulated, folding over itself. A shape tried to form, blurred and uncertain. I couldn't see it clearly, but it felt aware. I put my hand on the frame again. The wood was warmer now, faintly damp, almost alive. The hum deepened, pressing against my chest, filling my ears with vibration. I leaned closer. The black beyond moved like water, liquid swallowing light. It lapped at the edges of the doorway, inching toward me without stepping. I could hear a faint rustling, soft as fabric brushing skin. Or maybe it was my own breathing echoing in the hollow space. The shadows from the nave stretched long, twisting toward the door. A whisper rose, just at the edge of comprehension. Not words, not syllables, just intention pressing at my mind. The darkness seemed to know me. I stepped through the threshold. The liquid black shifted around my feet, cool and heavy, almost sticky. The fog from the church followed, curling in on itself, hesitant, afraid. I could feel it tracing my legs. Cold trails like pale hands brushing through the mist. Every movement echoed in the air, though there was no sound. I reached toward the center. The darkness parted slightly, rippling with liquid grace. It revealed nothing, yet I felt the weight of something immense. Patient, waiting. A smell rose, earthy and deep, like wet soil and decay. It made my chest tighten, slow my breathing. I wanted to step back, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. The door frame seemed to pulse, subtle and rhythmic, like it was breathing with me, drawing me in. The darkness undulated once more, folding over itself, deeper and slower. I closed my eyes, took a slow breath, felt the vibration in my chest. When I opened them, the darkness still shifted, alive, patient, waiting. The door stood faint, almost impossibly thin, yet impossible to ignore. I stepped back, though my skin still tingled where it had brushed the black. The fog rolled back toward the nave. The church exhaled as though relieved I had not entered fully. The door remained, faint, still, silent. And yet, it felt aware. I could feel it, waiting, pressing at the edges of sight. A presence that remembered me long before I had noticed it. I stepped away, my hand brushing cold stone. The air was still, the fog settling in quiet waves. The hum faded to nothing, but the doorway lingered in my vision, a faint line of shadow and intent. And I knew it would wait, patient, until I returned. The church was still. Fog clung low to the stone floor, curling around my ankles. The cold air smelled of wet wood and dust. Then the whispers began, soft, almost gentle. Names, old and forgotten, slid through the silence. Each syllable pressed against my mind, a weight I could feel in my temples, in my chest. Familiar and not. I walked slowly between the pews. They were empty, yet each shadow seemed aware. Rustling brushed my sleeve, though no one moved. A name echoed near the altar. It trembled in the air, thick and slow. I shivered, feeling the vibration through my ribs. I knelt briefly, fingertips brushing cold stone. The whisper pressed closer, wrapping around my thoughts. I could almost see the faces behind the names, faint, pale, unmoving. The air thickened, heavy with history and something more. A low hum joined the whispers, subtle and steady. It pressed into my chest, like a heartbeat not my own. I rose slowly. The fog shifted around my feet. Figures appeared briefly, just out of focus, vanishing when I blinked. A name lingered, longer this time. It was a plea, a warning, a memory of fear. The walls seemed to breathe it back at me, echoing. I traced my fingers along the pews. The wood was damp, alive with static hum. Each echo of a forgotten voice made the surface tremble beneath my touch. I moved toward the choir loft. The steps groaned softly, fragile under my weight. Above, the air quivered with countless silent lips, chanting names I couldn't know but felt. The fog swirled higher, brushing my cheeks and hair. It carried the faint scent of decay and rain. I could hear soft footsteps that matched none of mine. The whispers grew louder, pressing, insistent. They carried stories I could not understand, yet understood all the same. I felt them reach into me, pulling at something deep, unnamed. I paused, breathed slowly. The church seemed to exhale with me, holding its secrets just out of reach. The echoes shifted, pressing me toward the altar. Names overlapped, rising in quiet urgency. I felt the terror beneath the curiosity, the pull toward understanding and dread alike. The hum deepened, vibrating in the floor, my feet, my chest. I knelt again, touching the cold stone. The whispers became clearer, sharper, yet still distant. A final name lingered in the stillness. It pressed against my mind longer than the rest, folding into the shadows. I could feel it leaving, yet never gone, like a pulse beneath the walls. I rose once more. The fog receded slightly, leaving pale light on the wet stone. The whispers softened, distant now, echoing into the corners of the nave. I stood alone. The air was still, heavy with silence and memory. The church had spoken, and I had listened. The nave stretched before me. Fog drifted low, curling around the legs of the pews. The air smelled damp, like old stone and rain pressing through cracks. I stopped in the center. The shadow waited, still, patient. My own breath seemed loud, echoing, bouncing between the walls, a rhythm I could feel in my chest. It had been here since I entered. A presence at the edge of sight. Now it waited openly. The light from the stained glass was pale, fractured. Colors scattered across the floor, touching the fog. The shadow absorbed them all. I stepped forward. Soft footsteps met no resistance. The stone beneath my shoes hummed with quiet expectation. It did not move, did not blink. Yet I could feel it observing, folding around me, closer than air. The silence was thick, almost solid. I could smell cold metal, wet stone, and the faint trace of smoke from long-dead candles. Each inhalation pressed the isolation deeper into my lungs. I tried to look away, but my eyes were drawn, tethered to the dark shape. Edges hazy, formless, yet undeniably present. A soft rustling came from the corners. I thought I imagined it, but the static in the air carried it, faint and deliberate. I shifted my weight. My clothes whispered against the fog. A cold breeze brushed my neck, though the doors were closed. I whispered my own name. The sound felt alien in the quiet. No reply came, yet the shadow seemed to lean closer. Time stretched. Every second thickened the air. Each heartbeat sounded in my ears, loud, exposed. I tried to breathe slowly, counting in, counting out. The fog swirled around my ankles, twisting, folding, almost alive. The shadow did not react. Yet I knew it was aware. A patient predator of silence, waiting without urgency. I reached a hand forward. It hovered above the stone floor, trembled slightly. The air pulsed against my fingertips. The shadow shifted minutely. No shape formed, just an intensifying darkness that pressed at the edges of sight. I stepped back. The fog followed, curling higher, brushing my face and arms. The space felt smaller now, constricted, intimate. Every sound I made echoed, reverberated. My breathing, my heartbeat, my soft movement, all magnified against the stillness. I froze. The shadow remained, patient, unblinking, unmoving. A faint hum rose, like distant wings or vibrating stone. It pressed against my chest, insistent yet calm. I realized I was not just being watched, I was being measured. I stood alone. And yet I was not alone. The shadow had been waiting. I blinked. The fog shifted. The nave felt endless, yet I could feel the shadow's proximity in every nerve. I inhaled. The cold air burned my lungs slightly. I exhaled. The shadow did not move. I did not move. We existed together, a moment suspended, isolated, intimate. The hum faded, the fog softened. Colors from the stained glass returned to the floor, fractured but pale. The shadow remained, patient, silent, eternal. I took another breath, and understood finally the weight of waiting alone.